Assalamualaikum and greetings to Sir Ahmad Qazi. I am Haryani binti Adnan, and in this video I am going to present about my research topic entitled Determinants of Capital Structure Among Banks in Malaysia. Appropriate financial decision must be considered by companies to ensure effective and efficient operations. Thus, managers must have adequate knowledge in order to be able to make a good financial decision that can direct the company towards its financial goals. How company finances its operations depend on its capital structure. It refers on how company finances its activities and supports its growth opportunities either by internal or external financing. Capital structure decision is an integral part and an important decision for companies to make because it can affect the company's ownership and dependency on debt. An ideal mixture of debt and equity in a capital structure should be able to minimize cost and maximize value. To analyze capital structure, analysts can view the company's debt to equity ratio, which gives the insight into the company's level of external financing over its own internal funds. Next is Bursa Malaysia, which is previously known as Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange, which is the main exchange regulator in Malaysia and is one of the largest bourses in Southeast Asia. It provides access for over 900 companies to raise capital through securities and derivatives. There are three major markets in Bursa Malaysia, which include main market for prominent and large companies, ACE market for developing companies of all sizes, and LEAP market for small and medium enterprises. Banking companies involved in this study are all listed on the main board of Bursa Malaysia. The banking companies include Alliance Bank, Affin Bank, M Bank, BIMB Holdings, CIMB Group, Hong Leong Bank, Hong Leong Financial Group, Maybank Public Bank, and also RHB Bank. The proportion of debt and equity financing should benefit companies in minimizing their costs while maximizing their assets value. The need for capital structuring arises when companies start to expand because most of the time, newly established company will only rely on the equity provided by their founder. It is important for a company to know the factors determining their capital structure. So the main objective of this study is to examine the relationship between liquidity, profitability, and size towards the capital structure of banking companies based on the 10 listed banking companies in Bursa Malaysia. This study attempts to identify the determinants of capital structure in banking companies based on 10 banking companies listed on Bursa Malaysia. Both internal and external funding has its own pros and cons. This study might be beneficial for the companies and also for investors. For companies, this study might benefit them in terms of analyzing whether the liquidity, profitability, and size will determine the capital structure decision that they will make. For investors, investing in a company with high debt-to-equity ratio signals that the company relies too much on the debt to operate the business. Knowing what factors determining the company's capital structure can help the investors to avoid companies that are more exposed to bankruptcy risk due to the interest payment made on loans and borrowings. The data face few limitations. The data used in this research are collected mainly from the company's annual reports, and since all the data need to be calculated manually, the availability of data that can be readily used is unavailable. Furthermore, consultation had to be done online due to the current outbreak of COVID-19. In addition to that, the data also has timeline constraint. Initially, the study aims to examine data from 2016 until 2020, but due to some companies that have not yet announced 2020's annual reports, the timeline changed from 2015 until 2019. And also, since all these research activities are done online, strong internet connection is needed. This section will review the relevant theoretical models and also the past literature. So first of all, traditional theory in capital structure suggests that ideal capital proportion can only be achieved if cost of capital can be minimized while assets be maximized. M&M capital structure theory proposed the idea on how capital structure has no impact towards companies' values at all. This theory states that companies' value is determined by the earnings before interest and tax, and not by the level of debt and equity financing. Simply put, this theory states that companies financed by debt have the same value as companies financed by equities. Next is pecking order theory, which claims that debt costs increase with asymmetric information. The existence of asymmetrical information defends that debt issuance is more preferred by the companies, since equity financing will require stakeholders to obtain information related to the companies. Unless debt financing cannot be used, companies will try not to rely on equity just yet, and new shares issuance will be last resort to obtain funds. Next is the review of past literature. Liquidity is a big concern for companies, and according to some company with high level of liquidity will tend to borrow less, thus leading to negative relationship towards capital structure. Profitable companies usually use equity financing as explained by pecking order theory, in which it is easy to gain funds from equity rather than debt. Jafar suggested that companies should choose internal sources of funds in terms of cost minimization and external intervention. Usually, large companies assume to have low bankruptcy risk because they are financially strong. However, they still have this risk due to the high level of debt financing. The good thing is that they hold a lower degree of asymmetric information in the market. According to the SOMSA, the size of a company is determined by the natural logarithm of the company's total assets. It is found that there is a positive relationship between size and capital structure, according to Camille and Mansour. This study collects secondary data from the company's annual reports, which is collected from 10 banking companies listed on Bursa Malaysia for a 5-year period from 2015 until 2019. The secondary data used in this study must fulfill criteria such as to be banking companies listed in Bursa Malaysia, to have announced the latest 5 years financial reports, and all data needed must be presented. Consequently, all banks fulfill the criteria. The study used capital structure as the only dependent variable, which is represented by the debt-to-equity ratio, and the independent variables consist of liquidity, profitability, and size. Liquidity is represented by current ratio, profitability represented by return on assets, and size is represented by the natural log of total assets. There are 3 hypotheses that has been developed, which explains the relationship between liquidity and capital structure, the relationship between profitability and capital structure, and also the relationship between size and capital structure. Based on the descriptive analysis result, size has the highest mean, while debt-to-equity ratio has the highest standard deviation. The lowest minimum value is profitability with 0.005671, while the highest maximum value is from liquidity, which is 20.54224. To be considered normal distribution, skewness need to be ranged from -2 to 2, and only size fits this range, which shows that it is negatively skewed. Liquidity and profitability did not manage to follow the rule of thumb, which indicate that the skewness for both variables is not normal. Meanwhile, normal curtices should range between -3 to 3, and none of the variables managed to fit into the range, which indicate abnormality in curtices concentration. The result for BPLM test compared to Hausman test, and based on the result, p-value of BPLM test is below 0.05, which means that the data can be pooled and fixed effect should be chosen. Is correlation analysis, which is to check whether collinearity problems exist or not. Results varying from 0.0 to 0.3 means that the variable does not correlate. 0.3 to 0.5 means weak correlation. 0.5 to 0.7 is acceptable, while a good correlation range from 0.7 to 1.0. And based on the result, liquidity and size has positive correlation with debt-to-equity ratio. If debt-to-equity ratio increases, liquidity and size will increase. Meanwhile, profitability will decrease if debt-to-equity ratio increases. The R-squared value indicated that the liquidity, profitability, and size explain 66.56 of the debt-to-equity ratio variability. In addition, the p-value is lesser than 0.05, indicating that the variables are significant and the regression model in this study can be used. However, the independent variables used in this study has p-value more than 0.05, which implies that the variable has no significant relationship to its debt-to-equity ratio. Determining multi-pollinarity problem can be done by assessing the mean VIF for the variables. So below 10 will indicate that there is no problem with the multi-pollinarity. All variables used in this study have a mean of 6.62, which means that there is no multi-pollinarity issues arise. It is supported by the individual VIF of the variables, which is all lower than 10. Elasticity test is carried out by modified Wolf test to ensure better estimation on hypothesis precision. Since the p-values is less than 0.05, the data suffers from heterogeneity and need to be treated. Autocorrelation test use the Woolrich test. The p-value is greater than 0.05. It shows that the variables does not suffer from automatic correlation test. This test will not be treated. Based on the p-value from regression analysis, all hypotheses developed in this study fail to reject null hypothesis, which means that the independent variables has no relationship with the dependent variables. Consequently, all hypotheses are dismissed and alternative hypotheses are accepted. Since the findings rejected the hypothesis, future studies on this topic will be nice. To improve the results, studying this area but on different region or country will be good to test the relationship between liquidity, profitability, and size to its capital structure. Since it is important for companies to come up with wise capital structure decision, Detailed study on the determinants that might influence the debt and equity proportion need to be done. Due to the insignificant relationship between dependent variables and dependent variable, it is recommended for future researchers to analyze other variables that might show greater impact and significant relationship to its capital structure. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you.